Hello and welcome to episode number 15 of the Midierror Meets podcast, the monthly music podcast where we talk to a wide range of people in the music world. This month I'm speaking to Hannah Kemp-Welch, who is a sound artist based in London, and she's been responsible for a huge number of installations, workshops, performances and residencies, all relating to sound and sound art. She's just finished a residency at Kettle's Yard in Cambridge, giving local people a voice on the radio, and she's worked considerably in mental health, which we also speak about. So, I caught up with her earlier this year, and the first question was about her musical beginnings.
My big sister had a friend, a Spanish friend called Kitty. And my big sister was 11 years older than me, so I obviously thought she was the coolest thing in the world. Mm-hmm. And we had this cabinet, and there were some cassette tapes in it. And Kitty used to make my sister mixtapes. And I pulled out this tape of Faith by The Cure, which is possibly the most depressing album of all time. And I started listening to it when I was maybe 12, 13, and I was really connected. And you know, that was my first kind of real beginning of sort of obsession around music. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I guess listening to my big sister's tapes, and then school, kind of finding my tribe through the exchange of tapes, reading music magazines, hiding from everyone else at school in the guitar store cupboard, where they would have a cupboard with all these cubby holes, mm-hmm. and that's where they kept the guitars, and the music teacher was a nice man, would allow all the socially awkward kids, he'd kind of turn a blind eye to the fact that instead of going out and playing, we would sit in there and hide and play guitar badly.
That's cool.
So yeah, I guess that would be a kind of early memory of getting into music.
That's great. And you had like a little sort of nice little reflective chamber to play the guitar in there.
Yeah, earlier than that, my dad was quite a melancholy man, and he'd play Schubert very passionately on the piano.
Wow.
As did my sister. She was much older and much cleverer than me, so they used to play piano together. They'd sometimes teach me a bit, so I have a bit of second-hand piano skill. But I think, you know, kind of getting into guitar, being a teenage goth, all of that really kick things off for me.
Yeah, and The Cure is a great way to start, isn't it? I think there's a lot of people that once they started listening to The Cure, they never actually ever stopped. I'm certainly, I feel like that's the same for me. Yeah, quite dark early stuff though, isn't it? I remember I heard Disintegration, yeah. And I was like, wow, this is like Joy Division, this is great, I love this. I thought it was Joy Division, I thought it was Joy Division for quite a while. And yeah, great music, amazing stuff. Cool. So did you like study? When did you start to sort of study music or sound or those sorts of things?
I think I was the first year where they offered a music technology A-level at school, and I was not a fan of school. I was not good at school, but that's something that I got really into. I was the only girl in my class, which was quite a weird experience in some ways, but I enjoyed it. I hadn't considered going to university until I realised that you could study music tech at uni. I moved to Brighton. I wanted to be a DJ when I was 18.
Did you?
Yeah, I decided that my big aim was to be a free party DJ and set up raves in the fields, and that was somehow going to be a sustainable life.
That's a sustainable, yeah, that's sustainable. You get pension paid and all that stuff.
Good job security.
Yeah, national insurance.
Exactly. So I think I kind of wised up a little bit when I actually arrived. And
did you want to be did you have decks and stuff? Did you have friends that had decks and vinyl? Like, is that why were the DJs that you like aspired to be? Like, what influenced you to want to be that?
I think I just really enjoyed the freedom of raves. I grew up in the countryside, and just being able to be away from the normality of what I felt was quite oppressive society that I didn't understand. Mm-hmm. You know, going out into a field, spending all night with a bonfire and some blaring music in a forest with a diverse bunch of people was quite a freeing experience, and I enjoyed staying up all night and feeling like a radical and feeling like there was some alternative to spending the next 40 years getting a job in a supermarket and that being the kind of end of things.
Yeah.
So it felt like it offered new possibilities.
Definitely. Where did you grow up then?
In Oxfordshire.
In Oxfordshire, right.
Yeah. They had a really amazing rave scene there.
Did they?
So maybe that was just it.
Yeah, I mean, where I'm from in Shropshire as well, it's like farming land. There are no clubs in cities, and it's all about the raves at the weekend. So, yeah, while I wasn't someone who like got into the debauchery of it, I would still go along and like you say, like a fire with a rave in the middle of nowhere in a forest. There is an amazing spirit there, and it's also a very supportive place. It's very there were never any trouble. There was never any gang thing. It was always you were one gang.
It was a hippie kind of movement, peace and love, tunes, bonfires, being at one with nature, being in the forest, respecting the environment. It was kind of like very alternative Scouts. Brownies for rebels.
Yeah.
Unsupervised, no authority.
Yeah, that's really cool. A little bit the rave scene, today was the day that Keith Flint died. There's that Prodigy album cover where it opens up and it's like a valley in between the rave and the establishment and society, and they're cutting the bridge between the two. Yeah, it's that amazing spirit of doing that. So you did music tech at college. What sort of things were you doing on music tech then? What did they get you doing?
It's just really learning some very basic stuff. Back then, the desks weren't digital, so I had to learn MIDI numbers 1 to 121 and learn which wires to patch into which of the things in the rack, and just the kind of real techie side of things.
Yeah, hands-on stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, so you went on to study in Brighton.
Yeah, and it was quite a different feeling there. I was the youngest on my course. There were 3 girls. I was one of them. The other 2 had a huge fight in the first term and never spoke to each other again. Physical fist fight. And so, again, it was a bit of a feeling of isolation.
Mm.
And
did you play the mediator in that role? Where did you...
No, I think I wanted
keep
no
away.
part of it.
Yeah.
Everyone there was quite a lot older than me, and they all had established music careers.
Mm.
I think that I was surprised because I felt that everyone else would be 18 and a kind of beginner as well. But there were a lot of mature students on the course, and it was very focused on, producing beats, being an electronic musician. And although I sort of enjoyed doing that in my bedroom at home, I didn't necessarily enjoy the kind of formality of lectures about, the kind of how to use Max MSP, and, we had some kind of exercises about, you've got to produce music in different genres, and don't know, for some reason I just, that wasn't the part that grabbed me. What did really grab me though was a lady, one of our course tutors did a lecture about sound art, and I'd never heard of such a thing before. My sister's an art historian, my mum was an art historian, so they both dragged me around museums as a child, much to my protestations. I never really understood what art was about. I thought the whole thing was very elitist and bourgeois, and it was about being shushed and being silent and staring at something and having to ascend to some new level in order to interpret what was going on in it.
Mm-hmm.
Always felt a bit dense in those environments and like it wasn't made for me.
Yeah.
And I went to this lecture where our tutor was talking about the Fluxus artists in the 60s, and she played us some works where the artists were doing things like smashing busts of Wagner and throwing pianos off 10-story buildings and listening to the sounds of, busts being destroyed and pianos disintegrating or smashing into the pavement.
Yeah.
And that level of kind of humour and that level of protest against the kind of elitism of art really appealed to me. It felt like people were doing something to try and democratise this this abstract thing which I'd come to only understand within these very formal contexts, and remove it from that and instead make it part of the world and make it part of life. And I read a book by Alan Capro talking about the blurring of art and life, and I liked that idea that we don't see music or art as something that happens within formal spaces by artist geniuses who were typically male and white and middle class from certain areas of the West, and instead art was being framed, or music was being framed, as just listening or just viewing something, putting on a new pair of glasses, framing something yourself. So suddenly it was introduced to this whole new language of the world, where just a walk down the street could be a musical composition if you chose to see it that way. And that really woke me up and made me feel inspired and more interested in the concrete world that I was living in, rather than the sort of imagined world in a particular space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, sometimes, especially with things like classical performances, there's like a reverence that's required, isn't there? The musicians are elevated on a stage. They're all above you. You can't make any noise. It's a very much like an us and them feeling, isn't it? That sort of performance.
Absolutely. That whole division between the artist genius and the humble audience, the audience being the people who have to absorb the message that the genius gives you, with limited autonomy for interpretation, and someone to kind of, the gallery interpretation text or the museum program being there to correct you if your interpretation
what you felt about that was wrong, actually.
And I know that not all institutions are like this. It's just my initial experiences of them growing up, and I felt very outside of that, and I liked the idea that anyone or anything could potentially be an art experience, and that art was an experience and not a product. I didn't like the whole idea of the kind of marketable, saleable value of music and art. I didn't feel like a very business-minded person, maybe, and I was very much of the kind of opinion that value was about the experience that you take from something and not about a price tag. I sometimes facetiously want to say that as an artist I don't really have anything to say, which is why I do community or socially engaged practice, which isn't quite true. I just think that the role of the artist for me is much more about listening than about talking and telling, or even showing. And so I like to meet people, listen to people, observe things, and then try and construct something from that. And one of the sort of strategies that I like to use is kind of text-based or instructional scores, just like these Fluxus artists in the 60s used, where instead of creating something, they write down a suggestion or a proposition for what an art experience could be or how to have one. So, some of my favourite artists wrote things like build a fire and listen to it until the fire goes out. And that seemed to me to be a really magical way to view art or to view sound and music. Yeah, from beginning, like that sound really does progress, doesn't it? Like when you're making a fire and you put the big log on the fire and you hear that crack for the first time and it's drying out. Like that's a big moment. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a kind of, pensive experience where you're sort of intensely focusing on something and stroking your beard.
Yes. Oh yeah, I see what it's done there.
It can just be sort of thinking about the way in which you live your life and what brings you pleasure and enjoyment in it, rather than seeking outside of that.
Yeah, what immediately came to mind when I read that about what you said was Brian Eno. He did a talk at the British Library a couple of years ago, which I went to, and he said he did this installation, which totally, like, I was so impressed by it as an idea. So he had like 10 different hi-fis all around the room, each of them playing a CD by just standing in the room. And it was such a simple idea. I was like, yeah, like you become like the mix engineer of that art. Like you're you're making that art for yourself. I thought that was such a cool idea, so simple.
Absolutely. He has slightly ripped off, I reckon, John Cage there.
Oh, has he?
John Cage used to do these events at Black Mountain College with some of the other 60s radical artists of the day, and, from diverse disciplines. So they used to do this thing called Music Circus, where they would invite people to come to this event where suddenly they would have a circus performance going on above you, and 4 different orchestras all playing different things in the room, and you kind of create your own experience of the event by wandering between events and interacting with them in different ways.
That's incredible. What's it called?
Music Circus.
Music Circus, I'll write it down.
Black Mountain College. Everything is derivative of everything else at this stage.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did say that was one of his. I could have crossed it over with something else he said, so I wouldn't want to get Brian Eno wrong. Can you explain what the Fluxus experience is? Like, what is that?
Yeah, so I became really interested in the idea of art as part of life, and creating kind of sonic happenings. One of the favourite sort of Fluxus stories of mine is when they wrote to all the curators in New York and told them that this very exciting art event was going to be taking place, and they had to book coach tickets. So they got this coach full of curators, and then they drove them all into the forest, and then they gave them torches and led them into the forest and said the art experience is about to happen here, and then they left them in a clearing, and then they ran away with the bus. And so the art experience was the experience of all of these curators trying desperately to find their way from upstate New York through the forest back home.
Right. Wow.
and that's it, isn't it? It's art is a part of life. It's about how you live. And so the Fluxus experience, or the Fluxus practice, some people call it a movement, but I don't think that's right, is about thinking about the sounds that we surround ourselves with, thinking about the beauty in design, in cooking, in or thinking about the way in which we live, and how all of these activities can be a creative practice, which can give insight into how we connect as humans. Alison Knowles made lots of pieces where she would observe how different people make and eat a salad, or how the sound of rubbing Nivea cream on your fingers sounds. And this to her was art. And so my dissertation was about people who had a similar ethos to art and sound making now, and linking how technology has developed or expanded that practice in new ways. I found this amazing collective of sort of musicians and sound artists, sort of experimental musicians in Brighton, called The Spirit of Gravity.
Oh yeah.
And they were very influential when I was 18 to 20. I think they gave me their first ever CD because I wrote about them in my dissertation.
Did you really?
Yeah, I went along to some of their events, and they would do things like sitar bingo, where there would just be a man playing sitar, and we were all given bingo cards, and he would do these absolutely absurd bingo calls. There was only 4 of us in the entire theatre, or someone turned their vacuum cleaner into a bass guitar, so it was about kind of these sort of playful interactions with everyday objects and everyday societal conventions, poking fun at them and performing them as sort of absurdist art, but also as a kind of experience where we're all sharing in the comedic value together, but also listening as a practice.
Absolutely. I help out at Spirit of Gravity now, so I know it really, really well. But it's such a great night, isn't it? It's so good. I've spent many a time there, and just listened to people, whatever they're doing, like sound art. There's people with, like you say, there's all kinds of things. A tin can with an elastic band on it that's mic'd up, or someone with a trombone that's broken and they're dropping knives into it, or all kinds of amazing stuff. I love going to those nights. And Jeff, who runs it, was it Jeff that was running it then? I love that guy. He's such a great guy.
He is, absolutely. And what an amazing name he has, Jeff Cheesemaster.
The Cheesemaster, yeah. Cool, that's great. And did you enjoy your time in Brighton? I guess you had a lot of fun there.
I did, yeah. I spent more time at the Vox than I did at uni, and lots of time hanging out and listening to Spirit of Gravity weirdness. It was great.
I'll tell you something that was really good at Spirit of Gravity I heard recently was these people who, they called themselves electronic sound pictures, and they each had a record deck, and one of them had like a Chaos pad, another one had, they had like weird effects as well as their deck. And they were just mixing together like old records of people talking, or like farmyard animals or news reports, and like playing them backwards and, like messing around, putting phases on them and stuff. And it was really great. It was a real amazing tapestry of all these influences and all these worldly happenings just flashing by and then disappearing. Yeah, it was really good. Cool, so you went on then to do a master's in sound art?
I did. I think, the main motivation was I was not ready to get a job yet. I came up to London, I did this master's at CRISAT, and they spoke about sound art quite differently to how they did in Brighton.
Right.
They kind of almost looked at a different school within the kind of theoretical frameworks. And there was a big focus on listening and how we listen, lots of different modules on building installations, curating. So yeah, it was quite an intensive learning year. But the best thing that you get from any life experience is people. And that was a place where I met a girl basically who I've been collaborating with ever since, and that relationship, that creative relationship of kind of mutual support and development was really the thing that has made me continue to make art.
Amazing.
I think a lot of people kind of post art school or music experiences, it takes a lot to sort of have that confidence in your own creative voice. When you're first starting out, you're not going to be great. You're just starting out, and it's got to be okay to be wrong and to make bad art. That has to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
But how do you know if you're making bad art? And sometimes the horrible fear of making bad art, and not knowing if it is bad art or not,
that's
will stop you from making anything.
Exactly.
So having someone whom it felt safe to discuss ideas with, where there was a mutual understanding and where we could critically reflect back and develop ideas was really why I kind of continued.
Brilliant. And is that Lisa?
Yeah.
What's her name?
Lisa Hall.
Lisa Hall,
Best
that's it.
girl.
Yeah. I believe you were sitting on a sofa together singing about tall people. Is that her?
No, that's Ruth.
Is that someone else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ruth's my oldest friend.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So that's fusing those sorts of friendships and bonds is amazing, isn't it? For that's sometimes why you end up going on those courses, not really for the piece of paper or anything. So what have you worked with Lisa? What have you worked on with Lisa?
Oh, we did a range of things. I think one of the earliest things that we did, which who knows if that was a success or failure, but it was good for our development. We read some philosophy, and we decided that we wanted to make a piece in response to this Kierkegaard proposition that you have two choices in life. You can either live a life of morality or you can live a life of pleasure. Mm-hmm. So we tried to make a piece which was about exploring these two opposites. And we found lots of different texts which we felt exemplified the kind of polarity of the positions that we take, reflected in politics, in urban planning, in debates, and we pitched these propositions against each other and used different sounds and voices to represent them. And then I think we set up we kind of had a chance operations procedure going on with some playing cards and some makey-makeys where you could kind of touch and interact with the different positions. Whether or not that was comprehensible to anyone else, that's what we were doing. Mm-hmm. I don't know, and I think that probably our future works were much more developed in terms of keeping things simple and not, getting too involved with we don't have to have a flawless concept as long as it's something that is more understandable to your audience, perhaps.
Yeah.
But it was certainly a fun project to develop together. That was the first thing I think we did.
That's cool. That was Either Or, wasn't it?
Yes.
I've got that on your performances. And was that like an interactive thing? What did people see when they turned up there, for example, when they saw it? What happened?
We did a few different iterations of it. We did it as a performance. We did it as a kind of sort of thing that you could come and play with or touch or read. We recorded it as well. So, it was a kind of in flux work that we were experimenting and testing new strategies with.
Cool. Yeah, you have quite a lot of... you've worked with a tremendous number of people, really incredible establishments here in London and beyond. You did a Masters on Sonic Happenings, Descent and Destruction. Yeah, can you describe what that was about?
What did I write about 10 years ago for a 3-month period?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can remember. It was, I think it was continuing this sort of infatuation I had, that trivialises my feelings towards Fluxus, the deep passion and love that I feel about Fluxus practice. But it was thinking more about, in a kind of more expansive sense, I did kind of lists of 10 different art pieces where people had destroyed a piano, and then why the piano? Why is the piano seen as this bourgeois symbol?
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of, it probed more, I guess, why we destroy and what that symbolises, and how is again a kind of focus on sort of 60s, 70s art. And I guess that period, because, that was a real sort of fusion of interdisciplinary practices all coming together there, where it wasn't, it didn't feel so much like different art forms were categorised into, this is what music is now, and people were working with artists of all disciplines, and that was something that was really exciting to me. Definitely. And also, I guess, Dissent, sort of anti-establishment, defying conventions a little bit, like defying what musical conventions are, like defying who the audience is. Yeah, smashing some of the Viennese traditions that I guess lots of these artists felt had been holding them back for too long. There's a great Fluxus story about how some of the Fluxus artists performed as part of the Stockhausen piece, and some other Fluxus artists protested with picket signs outside the concert hall where it was taking place, and then some of the Fluxus artists who were performing in it midway through the performance left and started to picket against it. So this kind of desire to protest but also to be part of, the kind of duality of that in some ways. But also, I guess I was thinking a bit about the Eastern Bloc and how in days of communism there were different kind of constraints put on artists, and how artists collaborated across communities and across countries where there were restrictions on travels and visas. So looked at mail art and people who were living in communities out and not being funded by formal institutions, but instead people even radically abandoning the use of money and reverting to bartering systems, and communes and those kinds of things.
But self-supporting stuff.
Yeah,
that's really cool. How did you go about sort of entering into the real world out of education?
I went along to a sound art event at a gallery. I looked for the most stressed person there, and I offered to volunteer. He was extremely grateful, and then I ended up working there for quite a while as a kind of paid assistant, intern, something along those lines, and helping to make a sound art festival happen over a few weeks. And then after that, I can't remember, I moved to Poland for a bit where my grandma lived. I worked as a curatorial assistant in a gallery on an exhibition about the Polish experimental animation studio.
Wow.
So I learned a bit about curatorial practice and transferring exhibitions, archiving. Then I did some other internships in galleries in London, interned at Tate in their digital learning team, wrote a bit for their website about sound art, and then I got a job at Tate and worked for 5 years in their learning team.
That's incredible. That's an incredible place to have got a job, and yeah, what an incredible experience that must have been.
It was, absolutely. You know, just to kind of, this all sounds very great and privileged, so just to let you know that at the same time I was spending every evening and weekend waitressing at Hampstead weddings, which was the most appalling job I've ever had. Just going on replay to wedding after wedding after wedding, which all looked the same. It was the most bizarre experience. And I lived in a youth hostel.
Wow,
and,
did you?
Yeah, and lived
No
off
way.
Pratt sandwiches whilst going to Tate every day. But yeah, it was an amazing job. I felt very different and separate from a lot of the other people there. But I think that the learning team was just the most amazing radical team, and they really value diversity within their workforce. At least that team certainly does, and they are very welcoming to new approaches and ideas. And I think I was probably quite unsocialised maybe for the kind of gallery and office environment when I first arrived, and you know, I think it was a process of mutual learning there where I think I calmed down a bit, but I think that they got a bit more radical as well, I hope.
And part of that job, am I right, is that you were trying to get 18 to 25-year-old, more 18 to 25-year-olds into museums?
Yeah, 15 to
around
25-year-olds, but also different kinds of 15 to 25-year-olds. You know, we were looking around to Tate Britain, we were like, wow, you know, everyone here is very white, very middle-aged and very middle class. And, you know, we're not just talking about getting their kids to come, we're talking about, you know, what are the South London youth doing?
Yeah.
You know, why do the people who live on the council estate, which is 10 minutes down the road from Tate Modern, never come to the gallery? Why don't they feel there's anything there for them? So it was about diversity, it was about relevance, it was about cultural production, and it was about welcoming people into the gallery, not just as a kind of tokenistic gesture of you are also allowed here
for a moment
but under certain rules and conditions, but about saying to communities, what would you like to see in here? You know, this box is funded by you as well, what would you like to put in our box, you know? And what kind of events would be of interest, and what would you like to see? How can we reflect back the diversity of London within these walls?
Right. And how did you do that? How did that I mean, that's lovely, that's a great sentiment, like, but yeah, how did you do that in practice? What did you do to open the doors for everybody?
So there's the young people's programmes that Tate Britain and Tate Modern operates a model called peer-led practice, where they have a group of young people which are recruited through local schools, through youth clubs, through partnership projects. So youth sector partners might focus specifically on working with people with special educational needs, or young people with mental health issues, or different kinds of schools. And so they'd bring young people together and invite them to curate events as a kind of Friday late for their peers. And you know, that would mean that you'd get a grime gig in the middle of Tate Britain, but it also meant that, you know, kind of new sort of creative practice then began to filter through the Tate. So it would always extend, you know, beyond just the young people's programs team throughout learning, and then start seeping through front of house and, you know, curatorial teams. And, you know, it was about influencing the program of the gallery in a wider sense, not just about having these moments. I guess it's about building a mutually beneficial partnership with different organisations, and not using young people as a kind of bartering chip where, you know, we need young people for our stats to report to Arts Council, which is how we justify spending 3.6 billion of, you know, public money on this old oil painting.
Yeah.
You know, you guys have got young people and you guys don't have any resource or money to do anything with these young people, so you can bring them here and we'll run a project, you know. Not see young people as chips in an exchange, but really think about, you know, building a sort of long-lasting mutual exchange where young people can influence and change and grow and learn and socialise. And I think the social aspect of belonging to a group or community is really key to any of these encounters. And, you know, like my experience at uni, I took away a friend. You know, maybe the thing that some of the young people take away is that they have been given a space to be creative together and to work on something with a degree of autonomy.
Yeah.
And through that you can build some lasting relationships.
Definitely, and I think, you know, having worked with neat kids myself in the past, sometimes just listening to what they've got to say, or listening, or like giving them encouragement is something that they're not accustomed to doing, or it's an alien experience. So yeah, like seeing the effect of a really great workshop, it's an amazing thing, isn't it? Yeah, it's good fun. It's good. I enjoy doing that sort of stuff. I'd like to ask you about remixing the news. That was one thing that was mentioned. I just want to ask what that was about. It just like captured my imagination, that one. What did you do for that?
It was a collab with three of my colleagues, actually. It was funny, we wanted to do a project together, but we all come from such different disciplines, and within the constrictions of doing a drop-in event at a late events have like 7,000 people come. So how do you do a workshop for 7,000 people? You know, there were four of us, and so we each thought about the different interests that we have within our practice that could potentially work. And, you know, we had some illustrators, graphic designers. I work with sound, and so we thought about the kind of links within our practice that could potentially come together. I think there was a theme that we were responding to the Take Late that month. I can't remember what it was, so. And we decided, you know, I got really interested in that time about language and the language that we use and how different narratives are given to us by the media, and maybe probing or challenging that language.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking particularly at stats at that time, and how, you know, I think it was around Brexit time, I can't remember exactly, but stats were being used.
Is that what this time's going to be known as?
Brexit time. Yeah, God, it's a very long time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite a while.
Yeah. But yeah, I was looking at how, you know, newspapers are putting out these shock messages, and stats can be used to prove absolutely anything you like now, you know, and we've absolutely lost faith in experts in our news media and everything else. So we were inviting people to come and make their own newspapers using cut out pie charts and stats.
That's
and
brilliant.
Designed surveys that you could do and all kinds of things.
That's really cool. That's a really great idea, because the amount of people that, I mean, you know, there's a certain amount of people that love the news and that they you know, they follow it to the letter and they believe every word of it. And then there's like everyone else, who's like 75% of the population, that know that it's like corporate agendas most of the time. And it has no bearing on any of our lives, what they're talking about, really, apart from like selling arms somewhere, or like dropping arms somewhere.
Spoken, you know, like a true left winger. Excellent.
So yeah, that's a great idea to remix it and actually say like what is your news? What's the like the real news? What's really happening? That's cool, because I envisage that to be something a bit like Cassette Boy, where they like chop the news together. I was thinking, wow, I wonder how you remix the news at a workshop. But that's really cool, just actually creating the news. That's brilliant. Do you know a guy called Trevor Cox? Have you heard of Trevor Cox?
Yeah. I went to see, he did something with Chris Watson. They created a beautiful film together. I think it was Screen Tape Modern. Did I imagine that? Did that happen?
Chris Watson does all the recording for Attenborough, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know of that piece, but he's a great guy. He wrote a book called Sonic Wonderland, which is about like Sonic happenings in different countries and around the world, and places you can go and hear like the longest reverb tale known to man and all that sort of thing. It's a really, really, really cool guy. But yeah, Chris Watson equally, I went to an installation of his at the Attenborough Centre in Brighton, and it was like a journey around the oceans, and it was meant to be 45 minutes long, but everyone who I know went, we all felt like it was about 5 minutes. I think everyone fell asleep. It was so relaxing. It was just like speakers everywhere all around, and there was just cushions to lie down, and it was started off on Brighton Beach with like the seagulls and the sea flowing, and then it just went all around the world in the oceans. Yeah, it was really immersive. It was like surround speakers that were real, you know, high fidelity, so it really felt like when you heard a whale, it was right there. But yeah, I do recommend that book, Sonic Wonderland. It's really, really interesting. You are a resident at Kettle Yard in Cambridge, is that right?
Yeah, coming to an end actually this month. I've been at Kettle's Yard as their artist in residence for a year. And the brief there was to create new work in collaboration with North Cambridge communities. Cambridge there was a Centre for Cities report published saying that Cambridge is the most unequal city in the whole of the UK. And some of the factors that they attributed to that is how Cambridge is Silicon Fen, and Cambridge is a huge digital hub of technologies, where they've tech companies with Apple and ARM and Amazon and all kinds of others. And so they bring in digital workers from all over the world, and local people don't get those kinds of jobs. There's low social mobility in North and East Cambridge. So there's some real impoverished communities in North Cambridge, and my brief was to work with some community groups and see what artwork we could make together.
Excellent, that's wicked. So what did you come up with?
I became really interested. I did a bit of local history searching, and I learnt about a garden shed in which two men in the 1890s, I think, were tinkering around with scientific instruments, and they made some inventions which grew into a company which was absolutely massive and had its kind of heyday in the 50s, 70s, selling radios, telecommunication products, did lots of work in the war as well with radio communications, and they were a massive local employer. And I dug through all these archives where I'd find adverts for technology or engineer apprenticeships, where local young people would have an opportunity to go to college and get an education, but at the same time get paid. And they would have tech or electronics engineering jobs in this company. And actually lots of people who live in Cambridge are retired employees of the Pi Group, this company. So I was really enchanted by this idea of these two men in a garden shed, and then the kind of social aspect of tech companies as they were then, and how they had these values of employing local people, and that's just how things were done. I don't know if that's because they were a particular source for social good, or if that's just because that's how the economy was before globalised kind of digital work and movements of labour and things like that. So I thought a lot about the legacy that this company had left behind, particularly through their work in radio, and I thought about community radio stations and how most communities will have a community radio station, but the community radio station doesn't often feel very representative of the community. It's usually 2 or 3 volunteers who run who run these stations, who are very particular personality types, who are the kind of media savvy, good talkers, interested in tech, usually quite affluent if they've got time to volunteer or they don't have to work. And so I started a project which I called Hyperlocal Radio, which was about training up people in radio skills to be able to create their own radio shows, whether or not that's an abstract, exquisite corpse type sound art piece, or whether or not that's quite a formal music radio show. And so we went round care homes, primary schools, community arts groups, and we ran a whole load of workshops and created a big series of audio pieces, and then we took over the local radio station for a day and played them, and now we have an exhibition which opens next week, which will be both in the community and at Kettle's Yard, which is a collection of these works. That's
incredible. And it's sort of like the unheard voices of people, isn't it? People that are living their lives, that it matters equally as the people we hear or we're exposed to on a daily basis. Yeah. Did they enjoy? I guess they enjoyed being part of that as well.
I think so. I don't know if they enjoyed it more than they would do if I had run a football club. But, I feel like we built something together, and I, offered something which is a bit different. So, and again, I met some absolutely amazing people. I met a man who does what I like to call social care karaoke. So he's an amazing rock and roll singer. He's in a band in the sound like the kind of 60s, 70s, and he does he sings things like Sweet Caroline, and he very much believes in the power of music to bring people together. And so despite the fact that he's of later retirement years himself, he carries his karaoke equipment round Cambridge care homes and different centres and sings and passes the mic around and creates an inclusive environment for people to enjoy being together with music.
That's brilliant, isn't it? Like, those people are the pillars of society. Like, you need those people the people who give everything for everyone else. Yeah, that's really, really cool. Yeah, and I mean, there are a lot of projects I've written down, sort of loads of things that you've worked on. One thing that I loved was the anti-work performance. I just thought that was so funny, and I think anyone who listens to what that's about would have hysterics, like, with their own emails. What was the idea behind that?
I went to Zurich for Manifesto, which is kind of performance art festival. And they have a venue in Zurich called the Cabaret Voltaire, which is the birthplace of Dada and an important art historic building. And the rules at the Cabaret Voltaire is you can't watch a performance unless you perform yourself. And I was reading a lot of anti-work theory, and thinking a lot about the nature of work, particularly I think because of where I was. Zurich is a place which is just... everything about it smells like money, I was on my way home.
Oh yeah, it's in Switzerland, isn't it? Yeah, of course.
But it just, walking down any street felt like I was on a different planet. It's like being in the city at all times. Very beautiful there as well, and lakes and nature and, free swimming. It's, got the same kind of city divides between rich and poor as other places. But as someone who isn't a local resident and isn't familiar with all the, community hotspots, that was very much the view that I was getting of it. And so I was thinking about the nature of work and morality, and really actually had a bit of a meltdown after reading quite an intense period of reading a lot of anti-work theory by Bob Black and David Gruber and automation and the future of jobs. And, I was really starting to feel increasingly depressed about the fact that actually we've set up a society in which we perpetually create more work and worse working conditions and worse pay, so that we continue to pressure people into consuming more in a way which is completely environmentally disastrous and totally unnecessary. And how we throw 80% of all clothes ever made into the sea, and we live our lives in this constant world where you can't even walk down the street without having big billboards trying to sell you stuff, and voices in your ear in the supermarket and on the radio trying to sell you stuff, and just being constantly and continuously bombarded by capitalism everywhere you go, relentlessly. You cannot get away. And the horrors of this really, I think on that particular trip, were really compounded within me.
But it's all totally valid. Like, that's absolutely what is happening, and more and more so with the rise of the internet. That pressure is even greater with your leisure time now. That's being monitored. That's being commodified, isn't it? Like, just social interaction between friends is now sold as data, which will eventually sell you something else down the line. So it's totally valid. Like, I totally agree with you. It's not something... Yeah.
Agreed. And even this word leisure is so highly problematic now, because, I don't have that much fun in my leisure time. I'm just basically I'm exhausted from work. I'm collapsing, zoning out and staring in the corner of my room, or trying to desperately recoup enough energy to go back to work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people are in that situation, for
absolutely.
sure. Yeah.
I was reading, Bob Black talks about the Industrial Revolution and how, suddenly everything before had to be made by hand, by individuals. And suddenly we have machines which can produce all these things. But that surely should have meant that everyone who previously had to work 11 hours a day, to produce the amount of, pens or pins or whatever it is needed to serve all the surrounding communities and export elsewhere, they should all have suddenly had their working hours drastically reduced, and their pay could have stayed the same, because actually the business owners but instead the business owners' profits increased exponentially. Pay didn't go up. Instead, people had to continue to work the same hours, but suddenly we had, way more of all of the commodities than would ever need to humanly be produced forever, still being produced. And so instead of reducing work because of the invention of machines, we basically made people have to work longer and harder to compete with the machines, which is an absurd way of structuring society. But of course, everything is unfortunately driven by the powers that be, of course, with thinking about money and not about, other values of how we can live in a way which is going to make us feel happy and fulfilled.
Definitely, yeah. So the anti-work was, so that was it was 50, your last 50 emails.
Yeah, and they were so boring. The last 50 emails were so boring. I read out the 50 emails that I'd last sent, and they ranged from "thank you, noted, I will action that ASAP" to complaining about my job, but just the futility of the sheer volume of work-related communication that we send out. And looking at the layers of bureaucracy that we've created, most of us now work in essentially what is middle management, because we've had to create huge swathes of new kinds of roles where, we oversee people overseeing things and overseeing things. We have layers of hierarchies of decision makers, which actually, we could probably delete all these jobs. You could delete my job. I don't think that no one would die if my job didn't exist. And so it's interesting to think in that way sometimes,
Definitely.
When the revolution comes, or I think Douglas Adams writes in one of his books that he packs a spaceship full of all of the, executive marketing assistants, etc., puts them in a spaceship and sends them off into a burning planet, because actually they're not adding any value to society. Everyone who works in advertising, for example,
they're ruining us psychologically.
Negative social value.
Yeah, they're just destroying everyone's peace of mind, state of mind. Everything that you fear is being played upon to make you scared and buy stuff. Yeah. A really good example of that is in Brazil. So I lived in Brazil in 2011, and there's a documentary which was made by a British documentary maker called Beyond Citizen Kane, and it's about this media corporation that was basically in total control in Brazil, and it still is to this day. Rede Globo, they're huge, they're in everything. So what they would deliberately do on their television programs was they'd first of all ensure that there was enough electricity going to the favelas so that people could have televisions. That was one of their priorities. So make sure there's enough electricity for people to have televisions. Make the television an aspirational thing where even if you're in a favela and you have no money, you still have a TV. They made, that was such a desirable item. A bit like it sort of. It's not like that now here, but maybe in the 90s it was we got a big TV. Do you remember? Everyone would you thought that was great. But what they would do is they would make sure that they show between programs, aside from what the content of the programs themselves were, the advertising in between them would always be for products that were way above what anyone was able to afford, in order to just so they have aspirations of they're just totally, we're nothing here, we can't afford that, look at that car, we can't get it. And then the TV program comes back and it's just really destroying people deliberately. It was so strange.
How horrible. Yeah,
that's actually designed. So then this documentary, Beyond Citizen Kane, was made by a British documentary maker on Channel 4, but it basically got deleted. It was made in the 90s and it got just tucked under. And there's lots of really established and well-respected Brazilian musicians, Gilberto Gil, and lots of like prominent musicians who are literally on that documentary speaking out about Hedge Globo, and the whole thing got swiped under. But there is a Portuguese dubbed version on the internet, and I think it has subtitles. It's really interesting.
I'd love to watch that. Sounds great.
It's really good. It's dark.
It's interesting to think about, how we distribute messages or alternative messages in a time where our media is, no longer trustworthy because it's in the pockets owned by very few people. Cida Mieireles, this Brazilian artist, had interesting ways of doing it, where he printed the names of the dead on banknotes and then put the money back into circulation, the people who'd been disappeared by the junta.
Yeah, really.
And he also wrote instructions for how to create a Molotov cocktail on Coca-Cola bottles. So, using all of the items of capitalism and consumerism, and then, printing these items and putting them back in mass circulation to get this message out to people, because that was the only, that was a means of doing so, hijacking the existing system.
You also did one called Fractal Meat, which I like the name of.
Fractal Meat's a radio show by Graham Dunning.
Oh,
He's
is
a
it?
sound artist, and he invited me to do a guest feature for an hour. He has it's on NTS radio. It's at some time it's quite late at night. I can't remember what day of the week. But it's a kind of space for experimental music and sound art. And I was on it for an hour, and I think that I went through all my favourite sounds, all my favourite sound art pieces. So
great. What was in there? What did you select?
I had some of the dialer poets. So there was a group of artists, again 60s artists, who had a phone line, and you could ring up the phone line and they would tell you a poem.
Really?
So I thought that was lovely. I
That's
had
cool.
some. What did I have on there? I had some Ben Vautier Fluxus music, where he gave propositions for how you can make music in line with the Fluxus values, i.e. throwing records out the window or just singing one song. And yes, sound art with soul.
That's cool. And Graham Dunning is known for his mechanical techno thing, but lots of other things too. I think he's been involved with... I'm sure he's played Spirit of Gravity at some point, because I think everyone has played Spirit of Gravity at some point.
I've not yet played Spirit of Gravity.
You haven't played?
No.
Oh, come on.
I need to, yes.
Yeah,
I'll hit
come
up
on.
Jeff one day.
Yeah, I'm going to see him in a couple of days. I'll mention your name. And Splitting the Atom as well was another one that's...
Yeah, the
Brighton
Noise All
based,
Day.
which is also a lot of fun. And I don't know if you know Thought Process.
Yeah, I was
which
there.
Is in New Haven.
Yep, and the time before as well. Great fun.
Yeah, really diverse. 2016 was good because it didn't rain so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, great festival, isn't it?
Oh, it's amazing. My fave.
Yeah, we were running around there. Yeah, we're having a lot of fun this year. What was there anything that stood out for you at Thought Process? Like when you've been there, is there anything that you...
Oh, just the space is so amazing, being kind of down in these subterranean tunnels and these weird kind of war rooms as well. Very anti-war and military, and so it's interesting to see kind of museums where they talk about defence and subjects which I find quite controversial. But I saw... I can't remember who this was by, opened these drawers of this cabinet, and inside each drawer there was the sound of the wind.
I saw that one. Yeah. That was down in the tunnels area, wasn't it? Yeah, that was cool.
That stuck out.
Yeah, my friend Jason had two things there this year. Was it last year? He had a Tesla coil that you could play on a keyboard.
That's really...
which he was super proud of. He loved it. And then the thing in the room next door was this like LED noise box, which I absolutely loved. I could have stayed in there all day because I love drones. So yeah, he's a really talented guy who does lots of really cool stuff. Are you still good to talk to?
Yeah. I can talk about sound art endlessly.
Oh, can you? Do you think is it music?
Oh God.
Can you say, like, is that music? Is a soundscape music?
I don't know. I don't really like the word music.
No.
I'm bored of music. Music can go away. I just want to listen to sounds now. Do you know what I mean? Music feels quite limiting. and it's got so much baggage, you know, God, music, you know, so many preconceptions, you know, it's like sound art almost escapes that a little bit and can redefine itself, but on the other hand, sound art can, you know, also be hijacked by the academics, you know, who do want to talk about theoretical practices till cows come home, sat down, fallen asleep, etc.
Yeah.
But you know, it makes sense as a term for me. It sounds art, somewhere in between.
I love the space that you have with things like that, where it's like soundscapes and or like found sound and stuff like that. I think there's a lot more space to think and connect yourself to those sounds than there is with like house music or drum and bass. You know, it doesn't feel like part of you so much, you know. But yeah, when I listen to soundscapes or like ambient music, you get a reflection, a time for reflection and thought that you don't get with music, I find.
Maybe that's because some soundscapes are so boring that you absolutely get zoned out.
Just thinking about the washing, actually,
There's a lot of space in my mind. Nothing's going on here. Yeah. I don't know. Some of it is music, some of it is art, some of it is sound, some of it is sound art. I think that we shouldn't be too precious about these terms, and people should self-define whatever they think. I go for sound art because for me, the work that I make is about the ideas. Often the execution's a bit shit, which is fine with me because it's not about, you know, producing something which is perfectly mastered. It's about being out there in the world and connecting with other humans and talking about things. I use the voice a lot in my work. And also I think showing up in an impoverished community with a $2,000 sound recorder is just, you know, doesn't say the right thing, isn't really practicing the values that you're trying to bring out in the work. So I try and be inclusive, hand out cheap recorders to other people to record, you know, make works collaboratively, and engage with, instead of trying to frame things as culture, going and asking people what their cultural production looks like, their existing practice, because there's a lot to be found out there.
Definitely, absolutely. And when you really listen to sound, you can find beauty in like the most simple sound, can't you? Like even pitching them up and down as well, you know, like a simple sound pitched to get bass frequencies out of it and things like that. I just find that stuff amazing, playing things backwards and yeah.
Absolutely, but I also think that some of these practices are much more fun to do than to listen to. You know, I can't tell you how many sound performances I've been to now, which has been one man for 3 hours with one mixing desk, twiddling buttons and knobs and making different noises, which I have no context for. You know, I don't know that this is the sound of a mountain that he's pitched up or down, that, you know, he recorded on the day that he, you know, discovered the meaning of life. You know, I've got nothing I've got no emotional connection to these sounds. And so for me, you know, connecting, and I find the voice is my easiest tool to do that with. And, you know, engaging people with some kind of conversational dialogue and just being really explicit, you know, what we're talking about here, what is this about, you know, and not through a wanky gallery text, basically, where we're telling people, you know, that this is how we must interpret things, but, you know, what's the subject matter, what's the debate, what's the discussion, why is it relevant today? I want to make art that means something to people, that connects on some sort of an emotional level. I don't want to bombard people with sounds that they feel makes them more isolated from the experience of art than they were before going there.
Yeah, like draw them in. Yeah,
there's a place for everything, you know, and I guess we're all just trying to carve out what ours is.
Yeah, I've certainly found in recent years, like the time spent in front of a DAW making music, like a bit like what you said there, that like it's fun, the process is fun of making those sounds, but like the product is not as fun. I've certainly found, like with jamming with people, doing electronic jams and jams as a band, there is so much more fun to be had just interacting with people and playing with silly little tabletop toys than there is poring over like production and and the finer details that only you will ever notice.
Maybe, but I also find that area really therapeutic. But so the doing for me is always the fun part, but how can I let the audience or the public into the doing part? And that doesn't mean that, if you're running a sound workshop, you don't necessarily want to spend 6 hours teaching someone the ins and outs of Logic and, decibel levels, etc. I find that really enjoyable to do, but that is never going to be the aim for me. But I think the fun part basically is the experience. It's that Fluxus level stuff. How is this, a fun way of connecting with a sound, with the environment, with the world, with someone's voice, with an experience I had yesterday, with something that we're doing together right now. And so how can you recreate that experience? Because that's the exciting part.
So you worked with Raw Sound, doing music and media sessions in hospital, and with people with mental health, and you did something called Music to My Fears, which was a talk about mental health issues in music, with a band called Dream Wife who participated. Yeah, can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I manage a project called Raw Sounds, which is a music project specifically for people accessing secondary mental health care. And so that's people who have been referred from GPs into community mental health teams, occupational therapists and helping professionals, often people who have had a hospital admission because of mental health issues. And so we take music onto hospital wards and we run quite an expansive programme of music workshops in our community music studios in Brixton. And the idea is it's about access and it's about having a community resource. A lot of community centres essentially look like a kind of church or village hall painted a stale green with a pool table and a computer from the 1980s in it, and that's a community resource as, kind of dire times. And so it was a combination of, we've got a really good high quality music studio which is accessible to people in the community, and where they can come and feel valued as professional artists and come and feel inspired to learn new skills. So it's about, belief in music as a right for everyone who wants to participate should have an opportunity to participate. So we do outreach on hospital wards and we bring people together really to challenge loneliness as well. Social isolation is something that I think we've all experienced at some stage in our lives to some degree. And it's one of the most painful feelings, the feeling of not only being alone but also feeling like you'll always be alone because you'll never fully understand or connect with another human, and that's a terrifying place to be. And we wanted to create a space where lots of people could come together and, really foster a sense of acceptance and belonging through that shared experience of having been in that place. And music is a great tool to bring people together to do that. And it's also cool, so we kind of say, come make some grime music, we've got some studios, we've got lots of rappers here, we've got some good producers, we've got big speakers. So it's a place for people to come together. And as part of that, our funders, Comic Relief, one of our funders, I should say, invited us to chair a panel discussion about music and mental health with some artists, some of whom were called Dream Wife, who were some absolutely lovely feminists who are into social justice and politics, and definitely made some friends after that event.
Great. That's amazing that they were involved in that and they were interested in and played a part in the discussion of mental health. Yeah, which is something that's quite prominent at the moment, isn't it? Like that discussion, or the discussion of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're finally able to talk about things which we should have been talking about for ages, but which have been under so many layers of stigma. And I guess, slowly over periods of time, there's still so far that we have to go. I was talking to someone about the topic of suicide and the language that we use around suicide. It's taken from, we say, commit suicide because suicide was a crime. And if you had a failed attempt, then you could be prosecuted, and so we still use this language, which actually is highly stigmatised. We still talk about people who are suffering from mental ill health and things like that, and it'd be really nice to move away from this kind of deeply problematic language and ask people to define their experience however they want without being continuously labelled and fit in boxes.
Exactly, and a really good example of that is post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, because after people have gone to war, so after people have gone to war in I think the 60s or 70s, they called it shell shock. So like the shell, that was the object that created the problem. Like it's shell shock, like you had shock from the shell. And I think there was another term in between shell shock and PTSD, but essentially they're saying that the disorder is the person. The person has created or they have the disorder now. So it's not to do with like the act of war. Like, you know, the onus of the problem is now the person and not the act, which is really, really twisted.
Yep. And it's funny to think that, you know, a kind of shell could be in some way worse than the absolutely horrific, you know, piles of bodies and friends dying and fearing for your life and, you know, all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there is an intermediate threat. Like they sort of softened it over the space of, sort of turned it around. The terms went straight back round. I mean, it's horrible, really. But yeah, I think there was a second term they had it to, like a second level, and then it was disorder. Like you're not ordered properly. Like there's something wrong with the sequence here. So there's a disorder. Yeah. It's a bit, and I think in German they call it self-murder, isn't it? So it's called self-murder. So you are committing murder.
Yeah. I'm hoping that we can start to have some more honest conversations about homelessness and also about the whole topic of drug addiction and alcoholism, which is still absolutely deeply stigmatised and still seen by some as being some kind of choice. And so having more conversations, hopefully leading to better understanding and actually more empathy in our communities. It's, you know, shocking to see services being slashed under austerity, and services can be slashed when there's no public empathy towards people's situation. And so the more we build up public empathy, the more hope we have of saving some services which are going to keep people alive. And you know, things like homelessness and drug and alcohol issues are deeply misunderstood and not often talked about by the people who have lived that experience, but more often by people who are making judgments or about that experience.
Exactly, yeah, and homelessness is definitely a problem in Brighton. Early in the morning if I go out for a walk and stuff and I go through town, or pretty much all I see is homeless people, and there's a lot of them, and the conditions that they live in are incredible. And normally the default response from people saying is, oh yeah, that was their choice. Most people who are homeless decide to live on the streets. And I think people now, maybe with the way the media portrays things, is like everything becomes very simple, like it's just good or it's bad, you know, that's a good person or that's a bad person. There's so many like intricacies within each case of all of those people that you can't say like they all just decided to be homeless and that's it. So they want to do that and I don't need to help because that's how they wanted to be, you know, like it's a really strange way of looking at it.
It's almost like Adam Curtis talks about in hypernormalisation, that we have to simplify stories, that the media says that we can't handle complexity and so you have to be either a goodie or a baddie. And that's how messaging is now designed.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm a huge fan of Adam Curtis from the late 90s. Do you know he started off on he was the videotape guy for Esther Anson's That's Life, or That's Life. Oh. So he would go back through the BBC archives or the ITV archives looking for footage for that programme, and that's how he got started as a documentary maker, because he had access to everything and he started making documentaries, and he makes the best stuff ever. Bitter Lake's probably one of my favourite documentaries of all time. Even though it's massively depressing, it's wonderful at the same time.
My favourite thing to do when I get the flu is make a den, turn on Adam Curtis and order Indian takeaway. It's just a combination of curry and getting good and depressed, basically. You know, because it wipes away self-pity when you think about all the horrible other things that are happening in the world, doesn't it?
That's true. Is that why it feels good? I do the same thing. Like sometimes if I'm not in a good shape, I'll put on Adam Curtis and be like, fuck yeah. He knows what's going on, you know. Like, my life doesn't matter.
Agreed. And there's a great Romanian philosopher that I was reading recently, and he's a pessimist, like to the worst degree. Nothing means anything, etc. But I find that he's a pessimist in a hopeful way, because, you know, if you decide that there's nothing that you can do to change this corrupt society, and so you stop spending all of your time and all of your effort in doing so, then actually that's quite freeing in many ways. You know, if you accept the fact that actually things are bad and we are doomed, you know, then you can go on with living. And you know, not that I think that personal freedom is necessarily the most ethical way to live. It certainly is a way that I could live, but I thought it was an entertaining viewpoint.
Definitely. I think Darren Brown wrote a book about Stoicism called Happy, which is brilliant about not worrying about the things that you can't control, or not trying to change the things you can't control. Like, controlling your thoughts and your actions is essentially all you can really do. And it's a really great book on attitudes to just life in general. I found it really, really great, and it relieved a lot of my stress and pressure that I felt from worrying about, why is that guy doing that? Like, what's that person doing? Or, you know, all of that stuff becomes irrelevant because it's out of your control. Yeah, it's a good book, that. I enjoyed it. Cool. So you've done. Whereabouts has your work taken you? Because you've done stuff with the Tate Gallery. We talked about your stuff in Cambridge. Where's your work taken you?
Went to Barrow-in-Furness the other day to do a residency. I lived and worked and ate and slept with 12 other artists. And Barrow is a fascinating place because it's a company town where BAE Systems create nuclear submarines.
Right, wow.
And so you're walking around a town where BAE Systems warehouses tower above you, and you walk towards the sea and there's one of the submarines.
Wow.
So I spent a week there. It was lovely to be in Cumbria and get to know a little bit about artists working in Cumbria. Walked around the Lake District with some very cool people, and made some work about the language that we use to describe nuclear submarines, and more specifically the name, called the Vanguard class submarine, and the duality of the definition of Vanguard as a kind of group of people at the forefront of some invention, or as a foremost part of an advancing naval fleet. So I interviewed people about what they felt about vanguardism, and looked for the vanguards in the town.
Yeah, and I read that you said about it, you didn't want, you had to be quite you had to be quite delicate with the subject matter, because you knew a lot of the people you were interviewing had like relatives who worked there, and it was quite embedded in that community.
Absolutely, you know, it's very easy to go into a town and judge that, you know, everyone's living in a more morally unacceptable way because they're beyond the payroll of BAE Systems. But, you know, if you're born in Barrow-in-Furness, you're going to have a very different perspective on that, you know. There's limited options for employment, and actually many people do believe that we need a independent strategic nuclear deterrent. That's no view that I share. But until, in fact, trade unions start to support a defence diversification agency and start to put forward proposals for how we're going to transfer jobs to not be creating things that we think will actually bring detriment to our planet rather than positive outcomes, until people start to talk about how we move those jobs into more ethical industries, and we can't go there and judge.
Yeah, I think the Adam Curtis documentary, The Trap, the first episode of The Trap is called Fuck You Buddy, and it's about game theory, and it's, John Nash's idea that if you think I have nuclear weapons, then you should have nuclear weapons. And it goes down to some really small analogy of like two guys, and one of them's got jewellery and one of them's got the money, and the best thing that you can do instead of swapping them is to take both. Yeah, that was really cool. And so what sort of things did you do practically while you were there?
I bowled around basically in one of the other artists' cars, and we set off fireworks and recorded them, and we did some field recordings at the docks, and we couldn't get anywhere near the submarines. I don't know why. I kind of had this picture in my mind of putting a contact mic on a submarine. It's never going to happen. Very heavily guarded. But I went to find the local amateur radio society, and there were some people there who had worked on the submarines, and they didn't give me all the dirt that I hoped, but they did tell me a little bit about how submarines communicate and the different codes that they use. So I've produced a zine and an audio work using some of these recordings. But it was really my usual practice of going to a place, collecting voices, speaking to people and seeing what they had to say, and then creating a kind of audio collage of this.
Cool. I think some of those zines are online, aren't they? There's
Yeah.
some of them on your website there at the bottom.
They are.
Yeah, cool. You also had something in New Delhi, Virtual Voices, which was an installation, right?
I did, yeah. It was something I made with Lisa Hall. We were interested in the digital voices that we hear, so train operators, checkout desks, and that voice that says, "Do you have a member dividend card?" And we did a bit of a survey where we listened to where these voices appear and the content of their messaging, and we found that there was quite a strong divide in the gender roles of the digital workers, or digital voices,
Right.
and how women were in information giving roles and men were there to give instructions and warnings. If you see something that doesn't look right, it's in a male voice.
Listen to me, I'm a man.
Absolutely, completely. And also how, white and middle class and middle England all these voices are. And so we did a survey of these voices, and we wrote a piece, and we merged our voices into one digital amalgamated voice, text to speech. And then we did some field recordings, and we collaged this together into an 8-channel work where you're stood between 8 digital voices which are talking to you about themselves, because we found it strange to think that this automated voice doesn't have a body, but it has many voices which stretch out for millions of miles, and the bizarre experience of what the voice artists must feel when they go to the co-op and they hear their own voice 1,000 times, and how we can change these voices, and the danger of having such a lack of representation so standardised and rolled out. We were, before making this work, at a conference organised by Chris App, and it was about the digital voices and feminism. And one of the things that I learned there was that the voice of Stephen Hawking that we all recognise is also given to small children, because it's actually one of a very limited sound database of voices which are employed with this technology for people who have lost the ability to speak. And so you will see 7-year-old girls who have this voice.
Right.
And it really made me think a lot about how much my identity is tied up with my voice. And if I woke up one day and my voice sounded different, then it would be just as weird to me as if I had woken up with someone else's nose, or Kafka terms, as though I'd woken up with a large beetle. Or my nose, as in Gogol, had taken off and got a higher position in my bureau than me.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. I've never pondered what would happen if I woke up with someone else's voice, but yeah, it would be weird, wouldn't it? Although, when you hear yourself recorded for this first time, when you're not accustomed to recording it, it's the worst thing you've ever heard in your life, isn't it?
Yes, that's where I discovered basically my lispy voice and my lack of T's. But I think it's just a process of, you spend your entire teenage years getting used to what your face looks like. You examine yourself and you poke it and you prod it and your nose extends and, you get different bony facial features, and it takes you a long time to get used to how you look. And I think it's the same with the voice, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's almost like we have a later day teenage experience, or well, we do, because we're the age where we didn't always hear our digital recorded voices, maybe.
Yeah.
But a process of, relearning to accept a new part of ourselves that we hadn't examined before.
Definitely. You're like, well, I have no gravitas whatsoever. I'm not even listening to myself.
No, but, many other things, many other positive, we can't all sound like Jon Snow.
Yeah.
Neither should we. How awful would it be if everyone did sound like Jon Snow, nice as his voice is?
It was funny actually on the last podcast with Don Morley. He's a sound engineer who worked on Amy Winehouse Back to Black and Version, and he had a really deep voice. And I just, when I was listening back to recording, I was like, sounds like he's talking to a little girl. It was so like the relationship of our two voices was so different. I was like, I wonder if anyone else is going to notice that, or it's just me. Yeah, you get used to it eventually. Cool. So there's a lot of altruism in what you do, isn't there? Like helping people.
Oh, I think it helps me probably more than it helps them.
Do you think so?
I think that community is about exchange, isn't it? And I couldn't survive without community. I'm obsessed with community. I need to feel a sense of belonging for my own mental health and in order to feel connected to the world. So, working with people and being part of a group is something that makes me feel good, and that's what I get out of doing this work. And so, if it's also of benefit to someone else, then I see that as a fair swap.
Definitely, absolutely. Yeah, it's like, I think when people, people always say, "Oh God, doing voluntary work's really good for you." It's that's one of those like mutually beneficial, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Like engaging with other people and increased levels of empathy. I was going to say, like, when you were talking about empathy, like, why do you think there is a decline in empathy or an apparent selfish? Why do you think that like when we're talking about homeless people and we're talking about like having empathy, we need to increase levels of empathy. Why do you think we've got to a point where people are thinking about themselves more than they possibly should?
I think this is just social conditioning. I don't think that any child is born selfish and thinking only of themselves. They might struggle to share things sometimes, but it's a process of learning, and unfortunately all of the structures that we have in society are trying to get us to learn to be a certain way. Schools, and we introduce competition very early on. You have to be the best in your class, or you have to cram for exams, and these structures of learning produce the kinds of people that we are. People who absorb and repeat information rather than learn to question and think critically. Mm-hmm. So then when we, are 40 and we read a newspaper, if we've complied with this structure of socialisation that has been designed for us, then, absolutely we might read something with a lack of empathy because that's who we've been taught to be.
Definitely.
I think this is shaken up though by people who have profound experiences, people who have suffered trauma, people who have watched someone close to them go through a challenging experience, and that really opens our eyes, which is why I think that we aren't selfish people, because we do have that depth of understanding about the unmanageability of our emotions and pain.
So you've also been doing some lectures at Goldsmiths and the V&A?
Yeah, I get invited to do lectures sometimes. I really enjoy talking to students, and the lecture at Goldsmiths the other day, I don't know if the students enjoyed it, I don't think they really did, but I loved doing it.
That's fine.
An opportunity to speak about the thing that I love, which is social practice. Mm-hmm. So I did a lecture about community arts and social practice and the distinctions between them. I think probably, this would have been better suited to a different course, but I hope that I, giving lectures to people who don't necessarily have the same or share the passion for the subject, I think is more useful, because then you're hopefully sharing something that you're very passionate about with someone who's never heard of that before, and has previously never been exposed to that and has had no previous interest to it.
Yeah.
So if that sparked the attention or the interest of one person, then job done, success. But I loved doing it, and hopefully that came across.
Brilliant. Yeah, maybe it sparks something that's like, wow, I don't really have an opinion on what she's saying, and what is my opinion on it? Like challenging the way people think about stuff. That's cool. That's amazing. And did you have any, like, who were you talking to when you did those lectures?
students of MA Cultural Policy and Arts Administration at Goldsmiths did a lecture the other day in Brighton for the BA's Digital Music and Sound Art course. Did a lecture at VNA for their Create Insights programme. Just recently did some work with Tate and a collaboration they have with Tent, which is a gallery in Rotterdam. We're going to Rotterdam at the end of the month to go and launch a publication called Where Does Culture Happen? We're talking about how culture doesn't just happen within the places which formerly claim to own culture and distribute it according to their own values and tastes, but looking at who's producing culture and where. I made a collage for a double-page spread in the publication, which is about to be launched, and going to go and run some workshops around that in Rotterdam.
Awesome. Wow, Rotterdam's a great place.
I've never been.
Yeah, it used to be one of the biggest ports in Europe. It used to be like a real hub. It's the birthplace of Gabba as well. I'm sure you know what Gabba is.
Of course I do. The birthplace of Gabba.
Yeah.
Excellent.
They're very proud of it. I remember talking to some Dutch people at a party a few years ago and like, oh yeah, you're Dutch, oh you must like Gabba then, and they were so offended. I thought like I'm sure I've spoken to Dutch people in the past and they were like yeah Gabba comes from our country, yeah, but these people like don't talk to us about Gabba.
So like going to Sweden and saying you must like ABBA.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, ABBA. It's the first thing that comes into my mind when I speak to a Dutch person. Cool. And so, what sort of things are you working on at the moment? Like, what sort of things are you up to at the moment?
I've done so much. I've been through such an intense working period recently that I actually am just looking forward to doing a bit less. Just whilst I get my brain back together over the next couple of months. But having said that, actually, I'm working on Sound Camp, which is an annual festival to celebrate International Dawn Chorus Day.
Wow.
So we'll be doing a 24-hour live broadcast of collected streams from around the world, which will be live streamed, where you can hear the Dawn Chorus in different parts of the world. And we'll be moving through all the time zones.
That's amazing.
And at the same time, we'll be camping in a field with bonfires and sound artists doing performances and installations and lectures. So that's an annual event, and that's coming up in May.
That's really cool.
So yes, definitely some work on that. I just got invited to join a sort of sound art education, audio, podcast, radio producers kind of collective that is just talking about maybe starting to do some free workshops and thinking about sound in a more expansive way. What else am I up to? Lots of like little connections and things which might turn out to be nothing and might turn out to be something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like that's a question I don't really like asking people, because I know when people ask me that, I'm like, don't put pressure on me. I don't need to constantly do things. But I guess it's something that ends up coming out of my mouth in an interview situation, like what are you up to now and what you're doing in the future.
I'd like to just make something, because I've been doing so much work which has been within a certain framework. It's nice to think that, this residency is coming to an end, and now maybe I can have a little bit more time just to think about what do I want to make next. What's the next area of interest?
Yeah. Like let those thoughts just propagate and percolate and...
Yeah, have a bit of time for reflective practice as well.
Should listen to some soundscapes, some boring soundscapes.
Yeah, go on some sound walks, Just enjoy being in the world, Especially as I'm someone with a apparent commitment to anti-work.
Great. Well, it's been really great to talk to you. Thanks for speaking to me.
Thanks for coming.
I really enjoyed speaking to Hannah. It was a lot of fun, and we didn't really talk about music or sound as much as is normal on my podcast, but I really enjoyed speaking about sort of the global happenings, the capitalism, and the dark side of our society, which people don't normally talk about. She was a lovely girl. I would probably like to interview her again and not even talk about sound or music, but let's save that for another day. Okay, next month I'm speaking to a DJ and producer who has remixed prolifically for some really big artists and was quite instrumental in a club night in London a few years back. So that's coming up next time on episode number 16, which will be out in April. Thank you very much for listening. I am midierror, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.